Imagine being just 16 years old, kidnapped by pirates, torn away from your family, and sold into slavery in a land where you knew no one. For 6 long years he lived as a prisoner, believing he would never see home again. But instead of seeking revenge, he returned to the very people who had enslaved him, carrying only faith, forgiveness, and a mission that would change an entire nation forever. At the end of the 4th century, the Roman Empire was slowly fading. Its borders were no longer as secure as they once had been, and distant provinces lived under the constant threat of raids from foreign tribes. Along the western coast of Britain, life was peaceful enough for one young boy to dream about his future without imagining that everything he loved would soon disappear. He was born into a Christian family of modest wealth. His father served as a deacon, and his grandfather had been a priest. But despite growing up surrounded by faith, religion meant very little to him. Like many teenagers, he cared far more about enjoying life than about prayer or spiritual devotion. Looking back years later, he would admit that he barely knew God at all. Then one ordinary day, everything changed forever. Without warning, Irish raiders crossed the sea and attacked the coast. Homes were burned, families were separated, and hundreds of young men and women were captured. Among them was the 16-year-old boy. Bound with ropes alongside other prisoners, he was forced aboard a ship and carried across the cold waters of the Irish Sea. Every mile took him farther from his family, his homeland, and the only life he had ever known. He had no idea if his parents were alive. He had no idea if he would ever see Britain again. The world he once believed was permanent had vanished in a matter of hours. Upon arriving in Ireland, he was sold as a slave. His new owner forced him to spend his days alone in the mountains, tending sheep from sunrise until nightfall. There were no friends to speak with, no family to comfort him, and no hope of escape. Winters were bitterly cold, and the endless hills became both his prison and his only companion. Day after day, month after month, year after year, loneliness slowly transformed him. In that silence, something unexpected happened. The faith he had ignored throughout his childhood became the only thing he had left. He later wrote that he prayed constantly, sometimes hundreds of times each day, finding strength in conversations with God while standing alone beneath the vast Irish sky. The frightened teenager who had arrived in chains slowly became a man whose heart was changing from the inside out. Nearly 6 years passed before he believed something extraordinary had happened. According to his own writings, he experienced a dream unlike any he had ever known. In it, a voice told him that the time had come to escape and that a ship was waiting to carry him home. Trusting what he believed was God's guidance, he fled his master and began an incredible journey across Ireland. Traveling nearly 200 miles on foot through unfamiliar territory, he eventually reached the coast. There, just as he believed had been promised, he found a ship preparing to leave. At first, the sailors refused to take him aboard, leaving him devastated. But after a final desperate plea, they unexpectedly changed their minds. Against all odds, the former slave stepped onto the vessel and began the long journey back to Britain. His family could hardly believe their eyes when he returned home. The boy they had mourned for years was alive. They begged him never to leave again, hoping he would finally enjoy the peaceful life that had once been stolen from him. For a while it seemed that he would, but the mountains of Ireland, the lonely nights among the sheep, and the prayers that had transformed his heart had left a mark that could never be erased. Then came another dream. This time, Patrick later wrote that he saw a man carrying countless letters from Ireland. As he opened one of them, he heard a voice saying, "We beg you, holy boy, come and walk among us once more." The words echoed in his heart long after he awoke. The people who had enslaved him, the land where he had suffered for 6 long years, were asking him to return. Most people would have refused. Many would have sought revenge. Others would have spent the rest of their lives trying to forget. Patrick chose something almost impossible. he chose forgiveness. After years of study and preparation, he returned to Ireland not as a slave, but as a missionary. The frightened teenager who had once crossed the sea in chains now returned freely, carrying only the message of the gospel. He traveled from village to village, speaking with tribal chiefs, baptizing new believers, establishing Christian communities, and patiently earning the trust of the very people who had once treated him as property. His mission was never easy. He faced hostility, threats, imprisonment, and constant danger. Yet he refused to abandon the people he had come to love. Over the following decades, Christianity spread across Ireland with remarkable speed. While historians continue to debate the exact number of conversions directly connected to Patrick, there is little doubt that his influence forever changed the religious landscape of the island. Churches were established, monasteries flourished, and Ireland eventually became one of the great centers of Christian learning during the early Middle Ages. Long after the Roman Empire had collapsed, Irish monks would preserve ancient manuscripts, educate future missionaries, and carry Christianity to distant parts of Europe. In many ways, the faith that Patrick helped nurture continued shaping history for centuries after his death. Today, millions of people know his name because of parades, green clothing, and celebrations held every March. Yet few remember the extraordinary journey that came before the holiday. Before he became St. Patrick, he was simply a frightened 16-year-old boy who lost everything. He knew what it meant to be afraid. He knew what it meant to be alone. He knew what it meant to suffer injustice, and perhaps because he understood suffering so deeply, he chose not to answer hatred with hatred, but with forgiveness. History often celebrates those who conquer nations through armies and power. Patrick conquered something far greater. He conquered the desire for revenge. Instead of returning with anger, he returned with compassion. Instead of seeking justice for himself, he offered hope to those who had once enslaved him. More than 15 centuries later, his story continues to remind the world that the greatest victories are sometimes won not on the battlefield, but within the human heart.